Hi, I'm Femi OK.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Today, they call themselves stranded Pakistanis. We'll look at the stateless Bihari community and the challenges they face in Bangladesh.
This is the last of our Partition at 70 series, and we want to thank our online community for helping shape our coverage of the 70th anniversary of India's 1947 partition. This week, we looked back at history and shared stories of migration, returning home, and disputed territories. Today, we'll focus on Bangladesh and a group of people many say have been forgotten in the legacy of partition. Here's Dhaka Tribune editor Zafar Sobhan with his story pitch.
The key stories of partition are really stories of dislocation, stories of peoples being marginalized. And if we're talking about people who've been marginalized, what strikes me coming at it from a Bangladeshi perspective is to actually look at a community in Bangladesh who are variously known as stranded Pakistanis, Biharis, and I think this is a community which does deserve more airtime. This is a community which is in many ways been left behind by partition.
As Zafar just mentioned, they are known by the term stranded Pakistanis or Biharis. And more than 45 years after the birth of Bangladesh, the Biharis, an Urdu-speaking minority group, still live in the refugee camps set up for them in 1971 during Bangladesh's War of Independence from Pakistan. Today, Biharis continue to face discrimination for being perceived as Pakistani wartime collaborators. The tension between the two nations runs deep.
In 1947, the partition of India created a Pakistan in two parts, one Urdu-speaking territory in the west and a second Bengali-speaking region 1,600 kilometers away in the east. The two were united at first by a common religion, but disagreement over a national language and a crackdown on self-determination would eventually lead to greater conflict and the transformation of East Pakistan into the breakaway nation of Bangladesh.
Today we want to discuss the legacy of partition and war in Bangladeshi society and learn more about the present-day plight of the Bihari people. With us to talk about this in Washington, D.C., Imad Ahmed is Executive Director of OBAT Helpers. That's an NGO which provides health and education assistance to Bihari communities. Tazrina Sajjad is a lecturer at American University. She specializes in topics including transitional justice and social movements in South Asia. In London, Khalid Hussain is Chief Executive of the Council of Minorities. He grew up in the Geneva camp for Biharis and is a human rights lawyer. And from Dhaka, we have journalist and author Afsan Chowdhury. He's also a professor of history at Brack University. Good to have you here with us, everybody. Khalid, I'm trying to think of what it must be like to grow up in a refugee camp, for that to be your home, and a permanent home at that. There's a story that I know happened to you when you went to private school, when you went to school, that made you very aware that you were different from the other kids. Tell us that story.
Firstly, I just suppose if you say I'm a standard Pakistani, I'm not standard Pakistani. I'm born in Bangladesh, I'm Bangladeshi, whatever I speak Urdu or I live inside the camps. But you know, after 71, the people in Bangladesh, they just treated them non-Bengali, Biharis, and stranded Pakistani. It was very painful, you know, to live without any citizenship. You know, before 2003, we didn't have any citizenship. We didn't claim ourselves as a Bangladeshi citizen. But in 2001, we 10 people from Geneva camp, we filed a writ petition in High Court, and we claim ourselves. We are Bangladeshi. We born in Bangladesh in Geneva camp. And Geneva camp is the territory in Bangladesh, and our name is missing in the voter list.
So born in Bangladesh, but not having citizenship in Bangladesh, and you fought that in the courts because Biharis, after 1971, were marginalized, but for a reason. Afsan, take us back to the roots of this prejudice, this discrimination.
Just one thing. I want to add one thing.
Please do, Khalid. Go ahead.
We didn't lost our Bangladeshi citizenship anymore. Just after 16 December, in the automatic process, the Bengalis become Pakistani to Bangladesh. Even this community also be a Bangladeshi citizen. But the thing is, you know, the two type of Urdu-speaking living in Bangladesh, the people are living outside camp. They are very much Bangladeshi since 1971. But those are living inside the camps. they treated as a standard Pakistanis, as a non-Bengalis and Bihari living without citizenship.
So Afsan, I'm trying to understand, and as a global audience, it's good to understand what is the root of Biharis feeling that they are marginalised and they don't have the same chances that other Bangladeshis have. Take us back to 1971. What happened during that wartime?
Okay. The Biharis, as Hassan is called, Khalid is calling, they were people calling the wrong nationalism. Because they came to what was then East Pakistan thinking it was Pakistan. But what was East Pakistan was never really politically or otherwise part of Pakistan. It had its own history. And it was trying for an independent state as late as 1947. It failed. And according to the Lahore Resolution, which says there would be two states of Pakistan, it was revised in 1947 and made into one state of Pakistan. That is where the problem began. So when the Urdu-speaking people from minority provinces of India came and settled in what is now Bangladesh, they believed in the Pakistan nationalism. So they were always alienated. They were always outside. They were very privileged because they represented nationalism which no longer existed or no longer actually ever existed in what is now Bangladesh. So in 1971, when the war began, they supported the Pakistan army. And later on, the Pakistan army, when they cracked down in March 1971, and killings began, they were in favor of the Pakistan army. But what happened was the Pakistan army did not take into account that whole of Bangladesh was outside Dhaka. They took control of Dhaka, but not the rest of Bangladesh. And they were killing doctors.
There's one thing I'd like to add.
After liberation,
Sure.
the
So Afsan, I'm
Pakistan
not going
army
to ask you to
left
do the entire...
with the Indian army,
Afsan,
leaving the Biharis behind.
Afsan's on the phone, so you can't necessarily hear me jumping in. But Afsan, Imad wants to join in with your conversation. Imad, go ahead.
There's definitely one thing that I want to kind of clear up. When the camps came to exist, they were, of course, during the Liberation War, the Urdu-speaking communities were seen as, if they were, some were supporters of Pakistan, some were seen as supporters of Pakistan based off their language. So when Pakistan army did crack down, a lot of the retaliations against Pakistan from the locals, I mean, there was no borders touching each other. So like the only retaliation that the people could give was, or to anybody, was these communities that were all over Bangladesh. Now, that's why they were put into 116 IDP camps all over Bangladesh for not only safety from everybody else, they were looking for revenge from what the brutal acts that Pakistan army did do on the ground. So they were there for safekeeping, but not all were supporters of Pakistan. And over time, and we have to keep in context, it's been 45 years since 1971. And now we have second, third, fourth generation kids growing up in Bangladesh. And just like Khalid said, that these kids are Bangladeshi. They're born in Bangladesh, raised in Bangladesh. They live and breathe and are Bangladeshi. They may have ethnicity that is Urdu speaking, but they are Bangladeshi. And if you talk to the majority of people in these camps, they identify themselves as Bangladeshi. Now, there are a number of community people in the camps that have always had the largest voice, and they have labeled themselves stranded Pakistanis as a way to get help. Because if they weren't being attacked by, if they were being, for their safety, they were in those camps, the only people that they thought they could get help from was Pakistan, and Pakistan never came through on those promises. And they've been there since 1971. So it's an interesting situation that it's about the labeling. And even in these camps today, not 100% of these camps, 10% of people in Geneva camp, because these camps have turned into slums, are now actually Bengali. They don't speak Urdu, but these camps have become these places for low-income people to survive. And the cycle of poverty has kept them in those camps. And that's where this conversation.
If I may, Imad and Tazrina, I just want to jump in here because I want to bring in our online community. I heard mention of labels. Just one moment. I heard mention of labels, and so this is a comment that one of our online community members also brought up. This is Dr. Siegfried Wolf, who says the debate over the current term, stranded Bihari or Pakistani, distracts from the real problem, the shifting of responsibilities between the governments of Pakistan and Bangladesh. So Tazrina, keeping that in mind, have a look at what this person wrote in. This is because they collaborated with Pakistanis during Bangladesh's freedom struggle, and then Pakistan refused to take these faithfuls back. This is some of the feeling and the sentiment of people who are living in Bangladesh. They have towards this community. Tazrina, can you explain then how that plays out on the ground, what that looks like in terms of stigma, what that looks like in terms of everyday living conditions?
Let me backtrack a little bit in order to provide a little bit of greater context and clarity in terms of the discussion we are having. If you want to trace the presence of the Biharis, or what has been termed the stranded Pakistanis in the context of Bangladesh, present-day Bangladesh today, you have to go back even prior to actually 1947. And so as a consequence of the partition, Urdu-speaking Biharis actually moved to East Pakistan, and as has been mentioned before, they were, because of the fact that language was a very important part of the national identity even before Bangladesh was born, the fact that this community spoke Urdu and also had, as Mr. Chaudhry pointed out, had some social political affiliation with the ruling elite. And I think this is extremely important to understand some of the dynamics that are at play even today, because there was a sense of social tension that had emerged between the Urdu-speaking community, who were associated with the ruling elite and a part of the ruling elite, and of course the Bengalis, who were, ironically speaking, the ones who were disenfranchised and looked down upon at that point in time. And so when the 1971 war rolled around, there were many in the Bihari community who actually actively collaborated with the Pakistani military, and there was ethnic cleansing and acts of genocide committed against the Bengali population. Now, it's very important to keep this in mind, that not all Biharis, and I really want to stress the fact that generalizations don't help in the understanding of any complex issue. And so to say, for instance, that Biharis were responsible and they're all collaborators, of course, first of all, no community makes a singular decision together and looks on an issue in the same way. And second of all, this is a classic example of sins of the fathers and the political decisions made by certain people in 1971 being visited upon, as you pointed out, on generations of children being born in camps today, who have nothing to do with the history and the political choices of either 1947 or 1971. But there is one additional point I want to emphasize, is that the birth of Bangladesh, I would argue, has happened in two violent chapters, the first in 1947 and the second part in 1971. And the trauma of these two levels of violent establishment of a nation state is something that has never been acknowledged or reckoned with because of political issues internally, regional factors, and of course international factors. And that lack of reckoning has meant that there's a level of resentment and hostility. This is not a justification for what is happening with regard to the Bihari community today. This is an explanation, rather, to talk about the levels of resentment, hostility, suspicion.
So, Tazrina, I'm glad you mentioned that. So you mentioned an explanation, not just a justification. So here's one explanation, another one, really reiterating what you said. This is Philip. Philip says, there were border issues that stem from 1947, but I met several older citizens who had their country changed 3 times, and many wish that 1947 never happened. So that backs up your explanation there. But I want to move on just a little bit, because I want to talk about what life is like for the community in question. We actually spoke to several people who live in the camps, some in Dhaka, some outside, and they talked to us about some of the conditions that they face. Have a listen.
ये हो गया अब रहते हैं जेनेवा के मैं बाहर का एड्रेस देकर के हमको पासपोर्ट बनाना पड़ता है हम लोग का जवान का यहाँ पर बहुत प्रॉब्लम है हम लोग ये बाहर में हम लोग जाते हैं हम लोग थोड़ा मुंह से निकल जाने से हम लोग को लोग नीचा नज़र से देखता है हम लोग को सही नज़र से लोग देखता नहीं है
Regarding living conditions in the camps, I will say it's miserable, because if you see the rooms that are in our camps, these are so teeny that you will feel that the restaurants, sometimes the toilets of restaurants are larger than our rooms.
Khalid, so many issues there, but talk to us about the camps and the conditions in the camps.
Before going to the camp, I just want to add one thing. We just talk about the Urdu-speaking people are collaborated with the Pakistani army, but here is a very few people, and no one said about the Urdu-speaking freedom fighter. Even so many freedom fighters they supported to the war of Bangladesh, like Sayyid Saeed and Jahir Iqbal, Afaq Saeed from Bogra. There is a Kabul. There is so many unknown Urdu-speaking freedom fighters. They supported. Even the Urdu-speaking poets and literatures groups are they also supported, like Naushad Nuri. They also supported to 1971. So the problem is always the Biharis are the color as a collaborator, or they don't support the liberation of Bangladesh. So if I'm going to back to the camp situation is going to be very worst. I mean very worst, because the one guy said our room is very tiny. What about the living condition? You just forget it. I am citizen, but I am not enjoying all my fundamental rights. I have national ID card, but I am not able to get the passport. When we are applying the passport, the SB officer says, the special branch officer, oh, Rohingyas and Biharis are not able to get passport. Then we say, hey, come on, I have national ID card. Then what does mean of national ID card? We are still fighting to get the passport. We are citizen just for casting vote.
Yeah. Let me, if I can elaborate on the real tragedy of what has happened in the context of this particular community. It's important to remember, first of all, Bangladesh is a highly homogeneous, but not wholly or purely homogeneous nation state. No country in the world is. And there are obviously communities within Bangladesh, very small minorities, populations that are not Bengali or Bengali speaking. And so it's, when you talk about in terms of percentages, statistically, it's a very insignificant in terms of percentages, but culturally, historically, and politically, these are
Tazreen, let me help people watching just get the idea of the statistics. There are approximately 160 million Bangladeshis, 300,000 are Biharis. So you can see, just with those stats, it's like how a tiny community could be totally overlooked when there are 160 million Bangladeshis. Imad, what did you want to say?
Well, I mean, the last census that was done is the late 90s, and that was 300,000 at that time. So the population has grown over that time. And you're right. And in this population, I mean, outside of Bangladesh, this community has been forgotten by India and Pakistan. I mean, as my parents are Pakistani and I was born in New Zealand, but I knew about the partition, I knew about Pakistan, I knew about Bangladesh, but this community, I didn't even find out about this community till like 4 years ago, and is when I joined the organization OBAT Helpers, and we've been working on community development with the community there. But I just find it 300,000 people. I mean, it's not a little number, and it's systematic, and it's generational. That is my issue is with the kids that are living in the camps now. How do we empower this community? How do we develop this community, and get them out of this cycle of poverty in the camps, because they've been there for 45 years. I mean, you're talking about the living conditions are an 8x8 brick room on an average size, and you have members of an average of a family of 8 people living in an 8x8 brick room. That's where they have funerals. That's where they have weddings. That's where they have birthdays. I mean, the student you saw, Abdul Qasim, he's actually in his 3rd year. He's one of our scholarship students, and he's in his 3rd year of medical school. Imagine being a medical student studying for medical exams in a room, 8x8 brick room, with 8 of your family in there. You know, we don't even share our bathroom with most people on this side of the world.
I tried at the very beginning of the show to get Khalid to tell me the story about his first day at high school. And Khalid, you didn't tell me that story. Tell us that story, because I want to share that with Afsan.
Yeah, this was very painful. You know, when a group of students, around 20 students, we just moved to the Bengali school, the Bengali medium high school. And the first day, the Bengali students, they just start treating us as a collaborator, as a son of war criminal. Even we starting fighting with them. But fortunately, we had some good teacher, like some Hindu teachers, and then they just say, no, these are very innocent kids, are from the camps. The first time they are here, and What about going on in 1971 with their fathers and forefathers? So these are very much pure people they are trying to get the education. Why you guys are neglected them?
Okay,
So
Khalid,
after that,
thank you for sharing that story. I just want to put that to Afsan. Afsan, it's a very clear stigmatization from second, third, fourth generation Biharis. How do you make sense of that within today's Bangladesh?
Well, the Biharis from the first two generations wanted to go to Pakistan, so the alienation process was strengthened in the first two generations. There were not many people, because I have worked with the Bihari community for quite a while, and I know many would prefer to go to Pakistan. And when the passport issue came up, I think I was quite actively involved in that. But the point is, the area where they lived in, which is, and a few other areas, actually the condition is much better compared to the slum areas, because one of the subjects I teach is about urban spaces. And the other part, I think Khalid was
so I want to add real quick onto that one. The conditions of the camps.
The point is, if you do not understand urban poverty, and if you do not understand how they are being able to stay in an area from which all the slums of Dhaka are in huge distress because the land price is so high.
Correct.
All of them will be thrown out. The Biharis actually are in a slightly better condition.
And this is where we definitely have to thank the Bangladeshi government when in the international space of IDPs and people that are displaced. Bangladesh government has really been so much more progressive than other governments around the world. So they definitely need that credit given.
But in such an expensive area, I keep telling
but there's two things I want to add to that, Mr. Because there's 116 camps. No, there's 116 camps. No, that's true. The land rights have been secured by the government for sure right now. So no one can move them out.
They don't want to move out.
It's hard to do that. Like that's the conversation that we deal with every day. Is how do you develop the community and empower the community?
Let's say it's the best slum. I've been to the slum so many times. I agree.
So let me explain the demographics of the camps. There's 116 camps all over Bangladesh. That's in the northern areas, in Dhaka, in Khulna, Chittagong, Rampur, Saidpur. The difference between the camps in the urban and the rural areas are really different. So your Geneva camp.
Then I will walk out of the program, please. You must let me say.
Afsan, finish your thought. I understand you perfectly. You're saying that the Biharis are occupying prime time.
Are in difficulties in Bangladesh.
Right.
And if you look at the Adivasis, the indigenous people, they are in far greater difficulties. While that area in Dhaka and the rest of the places
they're not the only people suffering. Afsan, I'm going to move on because I literally have 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes left. Afsan and Imad.
Bangladesh will ignore all vulnerable people. That is a subject I teach at the university. I teach discrimination. And the discrimination issue with the Biharis will be the numbers. You have huge percentage of people. You have the Hindu minorities. You have the extreme poor. You have the Adivasis, which is the indigenous people. Now the point is, because of the Pakistan-India issue, this gets much more focused. And the reason is political. As a result, what has happened is that you are forgetting other communities who actually suffer. Now, I keep telling them, look, you occupy such expensive land. One of these days, one of these land barons are going to take your land away, and where are you going to go? But they have, I don't think they still pay for the electricity. They'll be able to pay. Whether they pay for water, they don't pay rent. And of course, people are looking at them.
Mr. Chaudhary, to also, the camps are having issues with, in Geneva camp, for example. So the different variations of camps. The Geneva camp is in an urban area and has a lot more resources than other rural camps that are all over Bangladesh.
Imad and Afsan, there's so much more to talk about. And Khalid and Tazrina, I hear you. And it's so rare that we get to talk about Bangladesh, what's happened since 1971 and the conditions down on the ground, that there is so much more to have a conversation about. We will revisit this on the stream, but for now, Malika, what do you want to leave us with?
I'll leave us with 2 tweets from Namati, an organization helping the Bihari community. The first hurdle is that many in the community don't know their rights. So this organization helps secure those rights through IDs, accessing healthcare, schooling, loans, etc.
Afsan and Khalid, Tazrina and Imad, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us here on the stream. We'll see you online. Take care, everybody.